Hey everybody, it's Ellen at Crazy For You, and welcome to Lunchtime Live. It is Tuesday morning, Tuesdays, oh my goodness. So, been a little behind the power curve. My newsletter is late. If you are waiting anxiously for the newsletter Tuesday morning, I apologize. It normally goes out in the wee hours, but I've just been behind. I'm ahead in the shop. So, I guess for a while there with COVID, I think the shop being closed and then, such limited hours and traffic, the shop kind of took a back seat in terms of getting all the yarn that I had up and out and on the shelves. So I've spent the last week or so with my fabulous team, Ginny and Mary, making new spaces in the shop and creating kind of an experience by brand. So, I talked about how I have all the Rowan in the front on the left, and I've just put up a beautiful new display for all of the Noro. So I'm super excited about that. And as I'm going through this, I'm looking and I'm thinking, wow, we have some really, really beautiful things in the shop that I haven't even talked about. So I'm just sort of kind of trying to decide what I want to feature in the future. I see a lot of you coming on, so let me just take a quick moment and say, hey, Mary, one of our wonderful team members. Hey, Gwen. Hi, V. It's so nice to see you guys. So I did have something that I wanted to share with you, and this is actually the topic of the newsletter, which will go out almost as soon as I get off of this live with you. And that is how to choose a good knitting pattern. I got this question from a lovely knitter, wonderful knitter, Joe Mike, and he said that he has had mixed experience with knitting patterns. He is absolutely a self-professed relative beginning knitter. So he knits socks and he does a beautiful job. But in terms of knitting sweaters and kind of, branching out a little bit, probably more of a novice in that area. And, you can be a novice in one area and an expert in another, absolutely. You can be like this super awesome lace knitter and you do beautiful lace shawls, but you don't really understand how socks are constructed, or you've never knit a sweater or whatever. They're completely different. So, there's really no, I don't think there's anybody who's an expert in everything. That would be kind of, except maybe Ginny. Hi, Ginny. Ginny's kind of an expert in everything. Hey, Amy, how nice to see you guys. So I think it takes a really, really long time to be that good at everything. But a lot of times a bad pattern will make you feel like a bad knitter. And I think that's really unfortunate. So what I wanted to do was to kind of look at today some of the things, and this is going to be a lot of it in the newsletter. I wanted to look today at some of the things that when you are looking for a pattern on Ravelry might really help you have a great deal more success. So first thing is you want to look at on Ravelry, you want to look at who is this designer? Scroll down. So if you found a beautiful pattern and you think it's wonderful, kind of click on that and then click on the designer's name and see what other things they have designed. If you see a slew of designs with lots and lots of projects associated with them, and then if you scroll down and you see that their designs have been featured in Vogue Knitting, they've written books, blah, blah, blah. A designer that comes to mind like that is, of course, Tanis Gray. She worked at Vogue Knitting. She's designed for all kinds of things, and she has 14 books to her name. So that when you see a Tanis Gray design, it's going to have a certain level of professionalism. It's going to be carefully written. It's going to be accurate. It's probably test knitted. You can count on that. So that's one thing to look at. Failing that, I love that Ravelry does allow newer designers to kind of showcase their work. So some of your really good designers that are newer may not have books. Maybe they just started designing after the advent of Ravelry, and fewer books are being really, less investment is being put toward books and pattern collections than previously. So the books and patterns that do come out are really good. But that doesn't mean that if you don't have a book or pattern to your name, that they aren't good. So if you see a pattern that you like, look over to the right on Ravelry and see how many other people have knit it. Click on that. It's going to be listed under projects. So if you click on projects, it's going to take you to all the other knitters that have knit it. And then there's a way you can filter to see project status. So click on that and select finished. Okay, so see how many people have actually started and completed that garment. I think that's a really good indication of a decent pattern. I think if you get it to a pattern where it's confusing or it's incorrect or it just doesn't work right, you're going to see a lot of them frogged or hibernating or whatever else. And when you see a lot of patterns that are hibernating, or worse, frogged, I think that's an indication that there's a problem at some point in the pattern that a lot of knitters have experienced. You can also select those patterns those projects in that collection of people who've worked that pattern that have helpful comments. So when you look at those helpful comments, sometimes it's going to show you what a more experienced knitter has found about that pattern, and they typically will have written something like, well, the pattern says this, and that's not clear, and here's what I did. And that's going to be kind of a good indication that the pattern itself maybe is a little bit troubled, as it were. So let's see, I have this right here. Another thing is that if you have had experience with a pattern, a designer, like I know one of our knitters, Andrea, just loves Heidi Kurmeyer. She loves Heidi Kurmeyer, and she loves Isabel. What is Isabel's last name? Anyway, you know who I mean. She makes a lot of in the round sweaters, so seamless construction, top down, and Andrea has found that this designer's patterns really, really suit her. She understands the way they're written, she understands the way they're constructed, and she likes the way that they fit. I personally have found that, and I know Amy, who's on here, has found as well, that Amy Herzog has designs that suit us, that are constructed the way we like to knit a sweater. So if you have found a designer whose work you like, really, relate to, chances are that their future designs are going to be good for you as well. And I explain a lot of this in, kind of in the newsletter about how with a large design house like Rowan or like Brooklyn Tweed, which is newer, but still, kind of an up and coming, very respected design house, design and pattern drafting are two separate skill sets. And it doesn't mean that designers don't know how to do this. It simply means that there are two separate skills that they get. And so a lot of your big houses, you'll have a designer that will swatch and sketch and then hand that off to some set of supporting professionals who will actually create a pattern based on, slopings and ease and fit and all the other kinds of design conventions. So I think that's sort of just an important aside, that a lot of the designers who are very creative haven't had that experience of pattern drafting. So it's not that the designers whose patterns don't work, it's that they haven't had the kind of professional training or the experience training to create a pattern that's easy to follow and accurate and has all of the conventions that knitters have come to expect, like a gauge. If you have two separate pattern stitches in the project, you want to be looking for a pattern that has gauge in both of those patterns. You want to be looking for a pattern that has accurate sizing information and expected or prescribed amount of ease. And this is a little bit of a controversial issue right now because everybody likes a different amount of ease in their garments. So I know that Brooklyn Tweed has opted away from prescribing how much ease you should have in your sweater, simply telling you the finished measurement of the bust. I think that's a nice thought, and I think it's important to recognize that we all like different amounts of ease in our garment. But I do think if you're going to be making something that you think, let's just say you want to make something that has less ease, remember that the other parts of the garment are probably going to be sized for a smaller frame. So like if the garment is intended to have like 10 inches of ease and you decide you don't want any ease at all, remember that the sleeve is going to be sized for someone on whom this sweater would have 10 inches of ease. So that's just something to remember. Anyway, where was I going with that? The kinds of things that a professional designer or professional pattern drafter would include is amount of ease, finished measurements, and a detailed schematic. And the instructions are going to be correct and tested and proofread. So those are the kinds of things that I think are important to look for when you are choosing a pattern if you're a relatively newer kind of knitter. Does that make sense? So that's what's going on in the newsletter today, which should be coming out soon. Did anybody have any questions or thoughts on patterns? Anything that has been particularly useful for you? Any shout outs for any designers that you are particularly fond of? The other thing I think too is if you choose a pattern and you are getting started with it and you find that it's really cumbersome or that you're really having a lot of trouble with it, I think it's kind of nice to share that information on Ravelry. And when you do that, make sure it's easy to be very emotional when you run into a problem. So I would advise you that if you are going to share your thoughts about that pattern on Ravelry, that you frame it in the form of maybe constructive criticism, because I do know that designers read all of those comments and that behind every pattern, good or bad, is a real person with real feelings, and you wouldn't want to hurt anybody's feelings because you're angry and emotional. I know that none of you would ever do that, but anyway, so that is a thought. So look for the newsletter. Like I said, will be coming out right after I get off this live. It's not that I didn't have it written. I just wanted to make sure I had a couple housekeeping things with the newsletter and the audience list that I wanted to take care of before I sent it out. But I will be sending it out. And I thank you so much for watching today. And I look forward to seeing you next time. So B has a comment. Thank you, B. I appreciate that. I hope that this is good information. I hope that the silly things that I share with you are not actually so silly. I try really hard to remember that a lot of the stuff that you just don't even think about after you've been knitting for a really long time is really important, and it's not always written down anyplace. You know, that's the kind of knowledge that you sort of get by trial and error. You know, my mother used to say, you got to kiss a lot of frogs before you meet the handsome prince. Well, nobody wants to kiss a lot of frogs, and nobody wants to spend a lot of money on patterns that are not what we would expect them to be. So I think having a few tools in your tool belt to help you kind of weed out the very worst of those that are going to be frustrating for you will be helpful. So anyway, thanks for watching. I will see you soon. And until next time, keep knitting and create something beautiful, my darlings. All right.